You dropped a bomb this morning on one of your broadcast emails about a new update.
The new one is GEM, essentially the central brain that accelerates the ads on Meta.
You're finding out stuff before the rest of the world is even finding out.
I had two questions that I asked in this and got responses on, which are relevant to advertisers. One was, how can advertisers better train GEM? So is it still about volume and variation, or are there new creative signals that matter more? The response was...
Before we get into today's show, our guest is actually going to be talking about this in depth as to how to deploy it within your department, within your agency. We are running a special right now at Tier 11 through the end of the year. This is a limited time offer where you can buy the Creative Diversification Package, which is the 10 different ad types and 30 plus creatives per month, 5 to 7 new versions every single week based upon which ads are getting the most ad spend and reach, which we'll be talking about today with today's guest. And you get the media buying, the best media buying on the planet, and the Tier 11 data suite with first click copy imports, as well as being able to track new customer acquisition costs exactly. You get those two things for free when you buy the Creative Diversification Package. Now, this isn't for everyone. Obviously, you need to have some significant ad spend. But for those of you who have not figured this stuff out for yourself and you need some help, we're here to assist you and put a plan in place for 2026. We've only got a month or so left this year. Now is the time to start planning for success in 2026, not push this off till after the first of the year. Book a call with our team so we can consult with you on creative diversification, how that might fit into your overall media plan. This special is going away at the end of the year. So now is the time for you to act. Head on over to tier11.com/CD or just check us out at tier11.com. Buy the Creative Diversification Package and you get the media buying and the Tier 11 data suite for free. Check it out. Hello and welcome to the Perpetual Traffic Podcast. This is your host, Ralph Burns, founder and CEO of Tier 11. And today we have one of the, I would say, the meta authorities of the world. Actually quoted in the Wall Street Journal. I just found out this past week. I was like, wow, dude, this is pretty cool. Like, if the Wall Street Journal is coming to this man, Andrew Foxwell, coming back on Perpetual Traffic for a second time, co-founder of Foxwell Digital, also Foxwell Founders Group, of which my entire media buying team are members of that group, which is the reason why you are here today. We feel and speak so highly of you, and they get a lot of information from everything. In fact, you're finding out stuff before the rest of the world is even finding out. And today we're going to be obviously talking about the Meta Andromeda update, but you dropped a bomb this morning on one of your broadcast emails about a new update to Meta Andromeda.
Yeah. I mean, as if we have just an abundance of time to deal with these things as meta advertisers. So easy on us. The new one is GEM. This has been talked about before. We've heard it talked about in kind of alongside in parallel to Andromeda as essentially the ads model, or what they're calling like the central brain that accelerates the ads on Meta and on, that Facebook and Instagram. So it's interesting, we never know how big of a deal these things are. But Meta is claiming this is going to be what they're going to be talking about in 2026. This is where they're going to be focusing. And this is a new model that is happening now in your Meta ads that you may not even have known about. There's a guy, Jason Yim from Meta, who has been talking about this a little bit more. And he said that since it has launched, it delivered a 5% increase in ad conversions on Instagram, 3% increase on Facebook feed in Q2 of 25. And in Q3, it doubled the efficiency gains. So let's just talk about what the hell this thing even is. It's essentially what they're trying to solve is, I guess, a couple different things they're trying to solve. One is there's a lot of signals that they were looking at in Andromeda, and Andromeda goes into this a little bit, but it's, again, they're kind of in parallel, but it also is alongside of it. So just take that with what it is. But there's a lot of signals. And what GEM does every single day is basically use every user action in real time to find the buyers. And so that's one of the main things that it's trying to solve, is that signal to noise challenge. The second one is the data problem. So, they're sort of what advertisers want: awareness, clicks, purchases, how the ads look, like a video, a carousel, a static, where users are. Are they in a reel? Are they in your Instagram story? And then what do users do? Do they like, comment, ignore, etc.? And it has to like make sense of this. So that's another problem it's trying to solve. And the computational efficiency of this, it was quite complicated, and it wasn't working as efficiently as it could. So those are the main things that this gem set out to solve. So now what this is essentially doing, I'll get to the conclusion and then we'll talk about it and back it out, is it's saying, okay, look, this person likes cycling content. Ralph and I were talking about this. Let's just start the hashtag now. Hashtag Ralph gets a new bike. We're talking
one for Christmas now.
But it's like this person likes, it's not just saying, hey, this person likes cycling content. It's understanding, look, three months ago, this person was looking at cycling shoes. They were looking at training videos for how to ride properly. And last month they clicked on an ad for nutrition around cycling, but didn't convert. And yesterday they browsed, cycling apparel. So essentially it's sort of looking at all of these things as a whole. And it does things like sequence features is what they're calling it. So this would mean the activity history based on what you've done and what you've engaged with over time. This would be non-sequence stuff. So this would be things like your age, the location, the ad format, creative elements. And that's basically what it's trained into. And another interesting thing that he said in this is, or that Meta's been saying in this, is that apparently Meta was still looking at Instagram and Facebook as two different ad serving engines. And this brings them into one, which I kind of thought we were past that. But apparently that's not necessarily the case. And so this is also able to learn cross-platform. So this is able to look at WhatsApp chats. This is able to look at, what you're doing in Reels, what you're doing in Instagram and Facebook, et cetera. And you're learning across based on the ads that you see. So let's say that you engage with video content on Instagram, but rarely click on ads, but you're more likely to click on Facebook. Gem will be able to look at that. Okay. So Andromeda is Andromeda. You can see what I'm saying. Like Gem is essentially the system in which you're serving ads, and Andromeda is a system in which, Meta is looking at the ads that you as an advertiser have. So you can see that these are sort of related, but they are similar. And really what I think is happening a little bit here is like a PR move this is like Andromeda for ad serving, like for the personal social graph of a person. And that's what they're calling it. So anyway, I'll stop there. There's a lot more to get into, but that's what Gem seems to be at this point, and what they're talking about it.
It's odd because we actually had a really good outline for today's show until this email hit, until you talked to your Meta person yesterday. I've got a lot of questions here. So it sort of seems like one is inward facing, one is outward facing, and they sort of meet at the middle to be able to serve ads more effectively. Is that sort of
absolutely. Absolutely.
A lot of the things that you're saying, though, I mean, we've been talking about Meta for years. I look at Andromeda as like the biggest thing to happen to Meta or to Facebook since ads went into the newsfeed and we got like really good targeting in 2013. It was a seminal moment for me. It was like all of a sudden I was like, this is the platform, and completely shifted my entire model from, being an affiliate to being an agency, which is basically what happened. The point is like, we've been saying a lot of these things that you're saying for years and years about,
absolutely,
55,000 data points, way back when that Facebook has. Now it's like, God knows what, how many data points they have. I mean, we intercepted, a Google memo 2-3 years ago that they have 72 million demographic and psychographic factors on every human on the planet. Like Meta knows a ton of stuff about you, but I was like, all the things that you're saying, I'm like, don't they already do this? Or like, why is this different, I guess, is the question.
I agree. In reading this, I think that's why, you always have to look at this as like, okay, part of this is like a PR move in terms of talking about this in a new way. Hey, this is what makes it different, right? I do think that this is the new way that they're integrating AI and sort of hedging against AI. Obviously, better AI is like going to make things more competitive in that attention, like grabbing that we're all trying to do. And so, Andromeda and the way that we can think about that obviously accelerates that. But I think this makes the ad serving and the hyper relevance a lot better. That another really interesting thing that was said here was it was specifically called out, quote, Gem will learn from Meta's entire ecosystem, including user interactions on organic and ads content across text, image, video, and audio that can rank. So we haven't talked about organic for a while. Yeah. And I think as paid advertisers, this is something that we know, but to a degree lives in parallel. And I think that it's becoming increasingly more important, but we just haven't seen it as much. And we see that, or we haven't really talked about it as much or seen it as much. And so now I think this is them saying, hey, look, this is going to have an impact on what ads are being served. And if people are interacting with your organic content more, they're going to see more. Or if they start with that, they look at it, it's going to have more. The other interesting thing is how much of this was based on, and how much of the messaging was based on, we are utilizing like across the ecosystem and the web. And so we know that's true, and we know that continues to happen. But I think it's one of the first times when I've heard them really talking about, look, everything you're doing, we can look at now. Because it was kind of like the dip after Cappy, and like the iOS 14, and then Cappy, and then it was like, yeah, you're tracking when they're on your site only, and they haven't really leaned into saying like, no, we're looking across the web, which we sort of knew that they were. But anyway, so that's an interesting thing.
That's a really good point. I've sort of assumed it always. They've never actually come out and said it. I mean, maybe they have. Maybe I went to a conference at some point in time where they did say it, or some speaker said it. But it's like I always sort of assumed that was the case. Like if I'm on the Trek, bike site right now, like Meta knows I'm logged into, Facebook and Meta all the time. Obviously, the app is completely active on my phone. All of those sorts of things. So I've sort of always felt like that was a given, but now you're saying they're being more transparent about and actually saying it, even post ATT prompts from iOS 14.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting one. I had two questions that I asked in this and got responses on, which are relevant to advertisers, which I think are really important. Yeah. One was, how can advertisers better train GEM? So is it still about volume and variation, or are there new creative signals that matter more? Right. So taking into consideration Andromeda and the way we think about that, which we can certainly get into, the big one, the response was cross-platform learnings. Creatives will perform differently for both platforms, but we will be increasingly intertwined. So again, sort of doubling down on that, like we looked at these separately, now they're together. So I think for a while, maybe, I don't know about you, but I certainly brands that I work with, it's like, there's like an Instagram forward strategy, but maybe not as much of a Facebook strategy, or vice versa. And so I think in reference to organic content is what I'm talking about, and in reference to ads a little bit, but like organic content really is a big one. That's one that's interesting to think about. And then user interactions across text, image, audio, and video, diversified creative. So we know that. That talked about that with Andromeda. That's a big one. Second question that I had was, what's the biggest workflow change advertisers should make right now to align with how GEM ranks and retrieves creatives? And the response was, rank both organic content and ads. Organic will play an important role in ad ranking. My question was like, what do we do? How does it go get it? And he's like, he said organic twice in one sentence. So that's a very interesting thing to me. And I think that for so long, a lot of people in this industry got their start as organic content people. I certainly did, right? And like now, and then you sort of like, yeah, ads are crushing. Like, do people even look at Facebook pages anymore? Who knows? We've had this ecosystem of like Instagram where we're spending time, and people that you follow that are content creators, that come out with really cool stuff. You're watching it, you're engaging with it, and it's really valuable. And they live separately to some degree. And I think now they're saying like, look, that is going to be an important thing to bring back in. And I think from a meta standpoint, from a business standpoint, that's a good idea, because the more that you pressure brands to say content matters, spend time on this, the more people will spend time, the more, time on site's going to go up or whatever, right? The engagements are going to go up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all good stuff. But anyway, those were my two things. And we can talk about how we think this relates to Andromeda as well, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
To a degree, based upon the answers that you're getting right now from Meta, is this a potential resurgence in the importance of organic or maybe even organic reach to a certain degree? We really haven't even talked about organic and organic reach in years, literally, on this show. Right. You probably don't talk about it either, but now I'm thinking, does this change that at all, in your opinion?
I think it does. The way that we've been forced with Andromeda into thinking differently, those of us that are trying to lead the way on this, right, about net new concepts and about net new ideas and personas, and the way that you're talking two different sets of people over time. I think that mentality and the way that we've thought about that has not translated and been thought about in reference to organic content. And I think that what they're saying is this is a valid way to start to transfer that framework onto your thinking and onto your strategy. I think that if you're looking at the measurement of it all and saying, are we going to be looking at organic measurement? Absolutely. I think we could potentially, in an ideal world, that's wrapped into, ads reporting to a degree as time goes on, because if they're saying it's this important to the engine itself, why wouldn't you be able to see those two things together? So yeah, I think it has implications on that. And I think the good news is if you've been leading the way on this, like I said, with Andromeda, and you've been, doing things in a varied way and you're putting out net new concepts, et cetera, I think you have a leg up. Right? Yeah. You don't need new creative every week. You need signal saturated creative. You need hey, this is good shit that's going to keep going. That's really the way to start to think about it. And I think from an advertiser standpoint as well, where I think this really comes in is how so many of us have in the last 12 months redone workflows of how we create net new concepts and how we find them and new iterations and how we are changing up visual formats, motivators, hook types. And I think this is going to force us to think about that in an organic standpoint too, to make sure that you're getting your ad served in a more complete way instead of being a one-dimensional thinker about this.
So really, the big thing about Meta Andromeda, we talked about it dozens of times here on the show. Well, way more than dozens of times, hundreds of times, at least at this point, is obviously its creative diversification. But now you're making me think, okay, so you need to do the same thing to your ads manager as you do to your organic, your reach, your feed, your presence online. Do the same sort of thing that is going to get you a specific, measure of results. And we've certainly found that, there is a huge difference of how the old way of doing things as opposed to the new way of doing things. And I can link to dozens of episodes where we've talked about this here, but approaching your organic side on Meta the same way that you're approaching the ad side with creative diversification, is that a potential, this is maybe what you need to do now that's coming out of this, and they'll start to emerge even more so over time.
I think that's exactly right. I think any of these changes, like I said, the big one for the people that are listening to this is it's about workflows in your agency or in your brand. It's about how you're building systems that allow you to diversify and build things differently so that there's different visual variations to it. And there's a lot of ways to think about this, but these are things like tracking net new concepts. These are things like trying out new personas. These are things like obviously trying out different creative styles. That's an easy one. But these are things like tagging. How are you tagging ads now? There's tools like Motion that have AI tagging. That's really helpful. But it's like, how are you tagging ads so that you can track all this stuff? Because that's really where it's going to become a challenge, right? Because creative without a system is like gambling with prettier chips. Like it just doesn't do anything.
Nomenclature, obviously very important on ads just to begin with. So you can at least organize your thoughts and organize which ones are actually performing. The idea of maybe getting into, some of the just generalized Meta Andromeda changes, a couple of questions and topics of conversation that always seem to come up are in this new environment, and we'll have to sort of see how GEM plays out. Does it enhance performance? We've talked so many times on the show about what Meta's investment in AI is in 2025. And their earnings call went from 71 billion this year to 82 billion. What's another 11 billion between friends? And they're going to be investing 115 billion a year by 2027. It's crazy amount of stuff. So obviously, we haven't seen the end of Meta Andromeda. This isn't it. It's just going to get better and better and better. And this is probably one of those iterations of that, the system learning even more and making things even more laser focused, both on the paid ad side and perhaps even, with this update on the organic side. Question is a lot of people ask is I'd love to get your take on it, is when you say a good ad, a good ad is not necessarily the thing that you would look for maybe a year or two ago. Like, what are you teaching your students about? All right, these are the ads that you want to iterate on because they're resonating with your audience. Like, how do you sort of start there? Because that's one of the bigger questions that we get just about Meta Andromeda. We have to assume that Gem is going to magnify this even more. But what's your take on that?
There's a lot of ways to assess a good ad. The most simple way to assess a good ad is based on how much Meta is spending on it. And I know that that's an annoying answer because you'll rebut and say Meta doesn't make the right choices sometimes. And I don't necessarily disagree. However, one of the things I struggle with is Andromeda forces patience because you're cutting things off too soon. And I know you've said that on this podcast before, and that is a thing that takes place. That's one. But the simplest way is, all right, is it spending? That's like a good ad. Mm-hmm. I think that, and does Meta see it spending? Number one. I think that then you start to look at, obviously most important thing you can look at is this driving purchases? Like on a click basis, that to me is an incredible indicator that it does well. If you launch an ad, a new ad in an ad set that has great existing concepts in there and it starts to pick up steam, that's another indicator to me that it's a good ad, that Meta's looking at this and said, and Andromeda has seen this and said, look, this is visually a net new concept. And so something's different about it. The visual style, the perspective, the context, the composition, the setting, the product, the talent in the ad, it's different. And we are going to service against ads that are absolutely murdering it, and it's gotten some conversions or it's doing well. That to me, over let's say a 7-day to 14-day period, that to me, or even depending on how much you're spending. If you're spending a lot of money, you can find that out in 24 hours. You're like, oh shit, this is a banger. It's doing really well. And so that's another signal to me that things are going well. Mm-hmm. Then I think if you don't have purchases, some people have smaller accounts and it's harder to look at that. And if you're not getting purchases through the door, then you're starting to look at obviously the classic creative metrics that you want to look at of hooks, hook rate, hold rate, stuff like that, right? So that we would call like creative soft metrics of, okay, early indicator, don't have purchases, but it appears that people are engaging with this ad at a rate that's reasonable. I think one way that you can tell if your creative generally is working, the way that I believe in is one of the most successful ways currently to do this on Meta. And of course, this always changes. So this could be out of date by the time this comes out, but is to look at rolling reach on Meta, right? There's a guy that is named Kurt Bullock. He has an agency called Produce Department. I can send you the link. He's got a tool that allows you to plug in your stuff and pull up a rolling reach report. And, there's varying degrees of how you think about this, but basically like, if you can see that your rolling reach over time as you're spending more money and you're putting in net new concepts and you're building more good ads and the rolling reach is staying consistent or not declining off of a cliff, you're doing pretty well. That's another way to know you have winning ads because you're reaching a new set of folks, right? And there's enough diversity in what you're saying and there's enough simplicity in the account as well in terms of the structure that's allowing Meta to do its job. And there's a lot you could get into with that, but anyway.
I think there's still an apprehension because we're all, as digital marketers, we're very untrusting of platforms. I mean, you have a great example of this is don't ever do what Google tells you to do. I mean, we have probably equal ad spend on Google and Meta at this point in time. We do the exact opposite of what they tell us to do. And for so many years, everyone wanted to hack Facebook. Like you and I have been in this thing for a while. Like there is methodologies, like we had the Michigan method, we had the e-com ad amplifier, all these ways to hack the algorithm. And so all of those people that still adopt that mindset are having a real hard time with Andromeda and now with Gem. What do you say to those folks? Because I think that's one of the biggest shifts. I think I even see it internally in our agency. You probably see it, in Foxwell Founders as well. As like, well, I don't want to give up that much control, or, I see this ad spending so much and there's no conversions, or the CPA is like, it spent $8,000 and the purchase is $8,000, for one purchase. But no, that's actually the ad that's actually driving all the other purchases to the bottom of the funnel. Like getting people to wrap their head around this whole thing, I find is the most challenging part of it. What would you say to those people?
Yeah. So first of all, validating for anybody that's listening to this that feels like I don't want to give Meta too much control, like completely understand. I mean, honestly, in 2025, Meta's been an absolute shitstorm of issues of like showing random images and texts. And, like one of the most viral piece of content I put out all year was a person wearing a sandwich board of all of the AI enhancements you have to turn off. And I said, I found the scariest Halloween costume that you could ever wear. And like, that's it. Because it's freaking ridiculous, honestly. Yeah. And so number one, like I totally agree with you. And as a person like you, Ralph, and as many people listening to this, that has grown up and become an advertiser in the Facebook world of when micro-targeting was what you sold as your value proposition, that's a scary thing to take on, right? Because you don't want to necessarily say like, we're not doing anything. By the way, you only have 3 campaigns running and you're spending $100,000 a month. Like, you want the complexity lends itself to such that you want to talk about that complexity as still a valid thing. Now, do I think that you have to not have any interest targeting no, I don't think that that's true. Like, I still think that there's room for interest targeting that can help with incremental sales. And I think that's valid. But is interest targeting lookalikes are trash. So I'm not going to talk about those. But let's say, is other types of targeting other than broad, is that more valid or going to bring you more incremental results than creating new systems for building better creative that are different visual styles and things like that? The answer is no. Like Meta said, no, this is what we want. So your resistance, and certainly I'm in this too, like my resistance is thinking in that old school style, but it's not going to help you in the long run. And so you know how to do that. You don't need to keep selling that. And what you need to do is shift your thinking into, we are now marketers, back to being marketers, not just lever pullers. And we need to figure out how to market this better and find out the consumer desires and problems and emotional triggers that people are feeling. And we need to have our product speak to those particular issues. And not every ad needs to be a problem solution. And there's obviously I'm sure on this podcast, you've talked about the stages of awareness of, going through unaware, aware, people don't, a lot of times you're marketing something they didn't even know that they need it. Okay. But I co-host a podcast, Scalability School, with 2 different guys, Brad and Zach runs Hollow Socks, which is an alpaca sock brand. And we've talked about on that podcast, the number of ways that he talks to and sells to hunters even because hunters are sitting in the middle of the woods and you could sell them socks and say, you need a better sock. But really what you're going for is like, comfort in the woods. Then you're talking about durability. Then you're talking about how you don't need a full sock drawer. I mean, apparently it's a major issue that like so many men, I included, you have so many socks in your drawer and you can't open the drawer. So they had an angle, right? I mean, this is a thing, right? And then you're like, so this is another angle. So my point is that to speak to those folks that go through this and trying to hack the system, the point is shift the mindset and say, look, we are now effectively a creative shop and we're back to being marketers. And what we are going to do is get deeply into the consumer's mindset or the potential consumer mindset of your customer and see not only what previous customers have done and what they like and surveying them, but also looking and saying, here's the other pieces of this and having frameworks to set up to say, how are we thinking creatively about the problems that we're not approaching? How are we approaching the personas we haven't previously approached? And building systems for that so that you can have a creative factory that's churning in a way that it wasn't previously. And that's not an answer that a lot of people want. And I still think that there's validity in if you're a marketer that does, you do Facebook, you do Google, you do landing pages, you do email. Like, I still think there's plenty of room for those shops who are going to do a really good job on all of those channels. And they're going to help their clients maintain growth and they're going to do well. I think that if you really want to break through and you want to have clients that are, doubling and tripling spend like the older days and the stuff you see on X, I think what a lot of these folks are doing is that they've shifted the mindset and now they're like fully creative shops and, outside of like getting their pixel shit proper, making sure all of that's dialed in, which is a huge part of this. Signaling and all that stuff is like messed up and you can't scale with it being not in a good place. And you obviously have some landing page work that you could do. But outside of that, it's like you're a creative shop. That's what you are effectively doing. And I think that's what you're pitching to yourself.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode by subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the gold nuggets for the metrics that matter and grow your business.